Hello and welcome to the TraceCloud app for Jira on the Atlassian marketplace. Jira is great at tracking epics, stories, and tasks. However, Jira is not a traditional requirements management tool. For example, your product typically has customer requirements, product requirements, functional and non functional requirements. You may have hardware, mechanical, compliance, and lots of other different types of requirements. Jira traditionally is great for tracking your software development process, and it doesn't really have a way to track your non software requirements. Now, there are ways you can create new requirement types, but there's more to it than that. For example, Jira does not support traceability. In Jira, there is no way to identify dangling. These are requirements with no downstream work. Suspect, these are requirements which have changed and have impacted other requirements. Or orphan requirements. These are requirements that aren't really connected to anything upstream, so you don't know what work or what role they're fulfilling. So essentially, there's no way to propagate your change or manage your change in Jira unless you're working in the software requirements framework, in which case the process works really well. But the moment you step outside the software requirements domain, which most of your products typically have, then there is no way to handle that situation in Jira. And TraceCloud aims to solve that particular problem. For example, what this is what TraceCloud on Jira lets you do. You can define different types of requirements. You can organize your requirements by folders, subfolders, and importantly, you can connect these requirements with one to another. And you can build a matrix view of your requirements. You can build a that's basically show me how all my requirements in folder A or type A connect to requirements in folder B or type B, right? You could build a trace tree view, which is show me all the requirements that are connected to this release and what's connected to that and what's connected to that, and just build this multi-level daisy chain. You could automatically identify suspect requirements, orphan requirements, dangling requirements. Basically, you can manage your change um, and propagate the change. For example, if you can think of a pond and somebody throws a stone in it, that's your change. And the ripples that are going out is the impact of the change to everything else in the pond. TraceCloud lets you manage the rippling effect. And of course, you need an audit log, version management, and baselining, and that's what TraceCloud lets you do. So I'm going to do a quick demo here. It's going to take me about 5 to 10 minutes to walk you through. Essentially, we have a Jira project. We're simulating building a new MRI machine. Let's assume we are Siemens and we want to build an MRI machine. And the MRI machine has kind of a software aspect. For example, the user interface screen and the operator screen. So all the software work is being done in Jira and your traditional epics, stories, and bugs. But then to build the MRI machine, there are mechanical, electrical, compliance things you need to do. And they're going to show up as your product functional and non-functional requirements in TraceCloud. And then we have this integration with the Jira software requirements. So you can build this end-to-end daisy chain and be able to present a traceability report to your compliance department to show that you are keeping track of change. And so when your device needs to get approval or you're confident that everything is done per quality. So that's what the demo is going to be. So let's dive right into that. This is my traditional Jira project, right? Siemens next generation MRI machine. And I have epics, I have stories, I have tasks, I have bugs. Nothing new here, right? You're probably familiar with this already. So let's jump into TraceCloud. So, like I said, TraceCloud lives on the Atlassian marketplace. When you install it, you'll see it right next to or in your Jira system. It's an app. So you'll see an app called TraceCloud Projects and Requirements. And this is the homepage. And if you have projects, you'll see them here. Otherwise, you can always go to my projects page and create a new TraceCloud project. We are given a few templates. I'm using the medical systems template for the demo project. Give it a name, a prefix, and a description. Or, by the way, you can modify any of them after you create it to suit your needs, right? So you don't have to be, oh, if I start down this path, I'm stuck there. In my example, I have created a Siemens project, so let me dive right into that. Now, when you are looking at a project, what you basically see on your left-hand side is an explorer, and this explorer has the requirement types that have been defined for this particular project, right? So in this case, I've defined releases, customer enhancement requirements, product requirements, functional requirements, NFRs, and then the traditional Jira stuff, epic stories and tasks. I also created validation and test results, right? You could always, if you don't like these requirement types, you could always go to configure project and create your own requirement types. By the way, if you have used an IBM Doors or maybe a JAMA software or any of the traditional requirements management tools or Rational Requisite Pro, what I'm showing you should be very familiar. We are basically taking that same concept of a traditional requirements management and traceability tool and bringing it into Jira. Okay. Anyway, so this is how you manage requirement types. You can create a new type if you don't like the existing ones, in which case, in this case, I have something called customer enhancement requirements, and they have multiple attributes here. I got the customer attribute, which is of the type text. I have an importance attribute, which is a drop down with these possible values. So you can define your own requirement types, create new attributes, and think of this as your Excel file with multiple columns, and you're defining the columns here. You can define roles. For example, the traditional administrator role is there. You can create new ones if you don't like what's here. I have one called Harvard Medical School Reviewers. You can add members to the role, and these are the privileges. You could control what they can do on a folder level and a subfolder level. For example, I may have customer enhancement requirements for Harvard Medical School. So I will let these reviewers get all these permissions and nothing but that. So they can get to see only that stuff. So if you're a member of this particular role, you get to see only that stuff, right? But in my case, I'm a member of the administrator role and I have pretty much all the privileges. With that, I'm going to return to the project. Um, Now, for each requirement type, for example, for customer enhancement requirements, you can create additional folders, right? So you don't have to stuff everything in one folder. You can have subfolders just like your laptop, right? Your Windows or Mac machine, you have folders, subfolders to organize files. Similarly, you can organize them here. So in my case, my customer enhancement requirements, I have three customers: Howard Med School, um, John Hopkins, and MD Anderson Cancer Center, right? Those are the three customers for my next generation MRI machine. So I created them and their requirements are here. But to build my product, I need not just their customer requirements, I have my product requirements. And my product requirements, because it is an MRI machine, I have electrical, mechanical, imaging, uh, patient ergonomics. So I created subfolders to organize my product requirements. Similarly, I have functional requirements in a similar format, and I have non-functional requirements. These are maybe my CDC compliance requirements, my FCC requirements, right? So these could be your different requirements depending on whatever you want to define there. Below that, you get your traditional Jira, Epics, and stories and tasks, and I'll tell you how to bring them into the system in a minute. Um, Now, the magic here is you can connect any of these requirements to any other requirement in the system. So let me start with an example. So let's say to build this particular product, I am looking at my imaging requirements, okay, on my product requirements. And one of the requirements I want is, let me create a new product requirement here. Now I have an option. I can create this in TraceCloud or I can import from Jira, right? So let's say there's something in TraceCloud I need to create because it's not so much a software requirement. So let me actually pick an electrical requirement so you can see the flow. So let's say my new product requirement creating in TraceCloud is this machine shall work both for 110 volts and 220 volts infrastructure. Infra, SDRU, CTRU. Okay. So I've, and by the way, these attributes that you see here have been defined based on the requirement type I'm in. So product requirements requires these values. So that's what that is. I am going to create a product requirement. When I create it, it gets a number, it gets a version number, a bunch of things you can do with it. But this is the requirement. When I go to my traceability section, it's an orphan because it's not part of any higher level requirement. And it's a dangling because nobody's doing anything with it downstream. So I can simply go to traceability and I can create trace out here. I can go to releases and say, you know what, this is going to be part of the release that is happening, the first release, clinical trials release. So PR11, I would say supports or implements, let's just say supports. This is basically, these buttons are, what does this relationship mean? If you don't like what is here, you can always configure this to suit your needs. This is configurable. Okay, so I just created a link from my PR11 to my release one. So if I go back here, if I go to the traceability tab, you will see that PR11 is part of release one. I can quickly jump to release one. That's my first release that's happening, and go to traceability tab, and you'll see that my PR11 is here. And if I go to my traceability details, this is nothing but list of all the different types of requirements that are part of release one. And if you go to product requirements, you'll see PR11 is here. And I also have customer requirements and NFRs, all part of the same release. But going back to this PR11, I might decide, well, this is good. This is part of the release. Let me create some downstream work for this requirement. So, for example, let's say there might be an FCC requirement required for this. So I can always go here and say, I want to make a copy of this requirement and I want to make an FCC requirement. And when I click this one, it will let me copy to FCC. So let me do that and copy. So it made a copy of this requirement called NFR6. I can click on this and jump to that. Let me go here. So if you go to this FCC requirement, this machine shall work, both of them, right? Ensure it is compliant with FCC equivalent guidelines in each country, in all countries, critical countries, P1 countries. So I have created an NFR out here, which is related to that product requirement, but I haven't tied it to it yet. I know that because this is an orphan. So I can go here and I say create traces and go to my product requirements. So my NFR6 should tie to this one. So NFR6 should connect to this PR11. Let's say this supports. By the way, these are bi-directional. I can create an NFR6 to PR11 or PR11 to NFR6. Because my NFR6 is below that, I'll do this. Okay. Now, by just doing this, I created a product requirement, connected to a release, and then created an NFR. This is where the daisy chaining comes in here. So what you're looking at is a context sensitive menu. This folder has one release called release one. I can do something called a trace tree. And I have an option of selecting how deep I want to go. If I said just go one level deep, it just shows me what's in this folder. But if I say take me 2 levels deep, it's going to tell me what is connected to that requirement. So you'll come back and say release one has all these requirements in it, and one of them is the PR11 that we just created. I can always go to this and say, yeah, you know what, just go one level deeper. I want to see what's one click below. And what you're seeing here is a daisy chain being formed. You can see this PR11 is connected to NFR6. And this daisy chain can go pretty much like 10 levels deep. So let's say I went till here. You can see that this release has customer enhancement requirements. Some of them have functional requirements. Some of them have tasks. And you'll see this interesting thing called SIEM-17. By the way, you're already 4 levels deep. If you say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 levels deep, right? You can continue to go deeper and deeper, right? In this case, you could see that this is tied to an epic. Epic is tied to a bug. A bug is tied to a story. Like you can see that you can go, whatever the daisy chains are, the system is able to build it dynamically for you. And I could click on this, and the magical thing is you're actually looking at a Jira, uh, an epic or a story, what the Jira object is here, right? Even though you are in TraceCloud, for example, this is a bug, I can click on this, it'll take me to the Jira bug, right? Or if this is a task, I can look at a Jira task, it takes me to Jira, right? Alternatively, I can click on this button. This takes me to the TraceCloud equivalent of that, which is automatically kept in sync all the time between. And not only that, you cannot edit this in TraceCloud because it is managed in Jira and the system is automatically syncing. Now, going back to what is the benefit of making these connections, is this is where the magic happens, is for any folder, the system is automatically trying to identify whether the requirement is a dangling, that means it does not have a downstream requirement, or it's an orphan, it does not have an upstream requirement, or you see this up arrow and down arrow that is kind of in red, that means it has a suspect upstream and a suspect downstream. That means somebody modified a requirement here, and that change hasn't been digested neither by the upstream people nor by the upstream downstream people. And that tells you that, okay, there is some flux in my release, and I cannot release the product till all the owners go and fix their work. And how does that happen? Let's spend a few minutes on that. So, for example, let's say I'm a Harvard Medical School customer, and I see this requirement has a suspect up and down. I can quickly go to this requirement and I can go to the traceability and see what the upstream requirement is, what the downstream requirement is. And if I'm in agreement with those two requirements, I just say, you know what, I'm going to clear the suspect race. I'm going to clear the suspect race here too. So automatically, when I go to my written to folder, all the requirements in my folder are all green. Now this one is an orphan and dangling. I'll say, well, how come no work is being done here? And I can talk to whoever that needs to be to say, please add this to your release and make sure there's some work that's happening downstream. So I can get them to go to create races, go to release, and say, just make sure this CER is part of this release. And the moment I do this and I return to folder, that requirement is no longer uh, an orphan. So I have no orphan requirements. Everything is pointing up. They're all part of some release. Now, these two are dangling. That means there's no work being done downstream. Okay. So you can take care of that if you need to. Coming back to suspect races, right now these are green. Under what conditions do they become red? Right. That is, if I own this requirement, CER4, and it has these dependencies across the chain, if for whatever reason I were to change this requirement, I said, this is not 27, this is 28, and I update this, a couple of things happen, right? You can see it has changed here automatically. If I go here, the related requirements start showing a suspect race. So if I'm the person who owns FR8, and I'm looking at my requirements in my folder, all of a sudden my relationship to some other requirement in the system is suspect, and it is my job to kind of see what they've done, why they made it so, kind of why they changed their higher level requirement. If needed, I can modify my requirement to suit that, or I can say no, it doesn't really impact my requirement, so I can simply go and clear this. Um, or alternatively, I could say my requirement really needs to modify to support the new enhancement. So I would say needs to change to support a higher level change. And then I update this requirement, and I can simply go to traceability and say, I have cleared this requirement, trace, because I've modified to meet their change, but I'll let this stay red so that whoever owns this requirement does the equivalent at that point. The interesting thing is this requirement is connected to a Jira object. That's why I cannot modify it here. So I have the option to always go to that Jira object if this work is being tracked in Jira as a software requirement and say must be compliant according to the updated higher level requirements. And when I do this change, you'll see a few things happen. Um, so this is TA8. So I return to folder, I go back to TA8. I have to click it here. I can go here. You'll see that this system has automatically, the moment I made a change in Jira, it was able to bring that Jira change story or task change directly into TraceCloud. Now all I need to do is go here and say, well, this has changed. Now it's compliant with that. I can clear this suspect trace. Okay. So in summary, what you're seeing is you can import requirements. Oh, I didn't show you how to do that. I'll show that in a minute. But if you're imported Jira tasks, stories, and epics are in TraceCloud, and they're connected to other requirements for your product. The change that happens in TraceCloud or in Jira can show up as suspect changes, and you get visibility to the change. And when you are ready to release your product, all you need to do is you need to kind of run this trace tree report, give it the depth it needs, and make sure that there are no suspect arrows, these red arrows that indicating that some changes happened somewhere that has not been digested across the system, and then you know that everybody's on the same page. Now, to create, let me walk you through another flow where you can create a requirement in Jira and import it, right? So let's say I'm in this Jira project and I create a new issue. This is a story, and I say all images must be displayable on a mobile phone. So this is a story I'm creating in Jira, and now this story, SIEM-19, I can import it. I can go anywhere to the project, any folder, and say import from Jira and say SIEM-18. It's going to go to Jira and say, I'm going to search for that, find that, and come back and say, I found this story. And oh, sorry, I might have typed it wrong. It's not CI18, it's something else. 19. Okay, because 18 is already in the system. So let me go and do 19. It'll come back and say, well, I found this in Jira. It's not in TraceCloud. It's a story I can import. So no matter where I clicked it from, it's going to put it in the right place. For example, it said I created ST4. If I go here, you can see that it created inside the stories requirement type because it's a story. And it created a folder called SIEM. And inside that is where it placed that. So stories SIEM, and of course, it's non-editable. Also, it's both a dangling and an orphan because it's freshly created story in Jira that we just imported. It's managed in Jira, right? Now I can always go and do my traceability thing where I say, well, this requirement, this story that's coming in from Jira, is related to images, and it is tied to my product requirements imaging. And images can be stored in Google Cloud. Images should be universal. Let's say, you know what, this is related to this product requirement, and I say this story 4 supports Jira implements PR6. Let me do that. So if you see this ST4, I just made this one connection. I connected my story 4 to a product requirement. Because product requirement is already tied up to a release, when I do a trace tree report, and if I go deep enough, I should see my ST-4 in there. ST dash. Images should be compliant. Maybe I need to go one level deeper. It right? SIEM-19. Let's see what's happening. So if I go to my stories, ST4, STM, okay, if I go, let's work backwards to this. So this story is connected to PR6. This PR6 is connected to rel2 or not to rel1. So let me go ahead and connect this to rel1. So create traces, releases, PR6 is tracing up to rel1. Okay. Now if I do this, if I go here, create trace tree, go a few levels deep, run this, ST-4 should be here. So you can see that ST4, which represents that SIEM-19 story from Jira in TraceCloud, is connected to PR6, which in turn is tied to rel1. So that's how the daisy chain is formed dynamically, and this shows up in this report. And now, if for whatever reason this story gets modified in Jira, it gets replicated into TraceCloud, and this arrow becomes red. So the owner of the product requirement knows that, well, there's some change out there that they need to digest. So hopefully this kind of shows how the system is tightly integrated with Jira, You can manage different types of requirements beyond your software requirements. You could, the system is automatically flowing information back and forth. It can identify your dangling requirements and your orphan requirements that are tied multi levels below your top level requirement. You also have your traditional saved reports where you can save a bunch of reports. You can, for example, have a filter that says, get me all my dangling product requirements or all my orphan functional requirements. I can simply run this report to make sure that, well, before I go live, I shouldn't be having any orphan functional requirements. You have a search functionality, you have the recycle bin functionality where anytime a requirement is kind of soft deleted, it is in the recycle bin that you can restore from. You also have a fully baked kind of a versioning policy. So anytime a requirement is modified, you can actually get to the different versions of the requirement. I might have modified this one. This has two versions. I can go here and look at the previous versions and compare notes. So it is a full-fledged product, even though this is a version 1.0. Um, TraceCloud as a product, just as a company, has been in business for almost since 2009. So we've been in business for 15 years. And we have a traditional requirements management product that's full featured, that is running on AWS. And we have a lot of customers who asked for integration with Jira over time. While we have that integration in the traditional product, this effort is to build this entire app in Jira natively. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us. You should be able to contact us at uh, support@tracecloud.com, and we'll be able to get back to you and solve any problems. In summary, TraceCloud is your requirements management solution built on Jira Forge platform, available on the Atlassian marketplace, gives you end-to-end traceability and ease of use. It's like basically having an IBM doors built natively in Jira, right? Thank you. And if you have any questions, you can contact us at support@tracecloud.com.